Okay, just to catch up, everybody. Here's where we're at whenever we stopped last class. And I had a great question yesterday, really kind of a longer meeting of us just talking about some questions. And I had a student ask me, okay, here, let's say I wanted to get my user's name, right? Well, that means that I would need to do a join, right? I need to do a join with my show and my user. So if I go into my code and I do this join, let me pull it up in my show, I could do something like this, right? Where I do a query that is shows left join to make sure I get all my shows. We know a show has to have a creator, so join would do the same thing, but we just do a left join to make sure no stone unturned. And I can have this query. And yesterday it was kind of brought to my attention that, well, why wouldn't, right? If I'm actually running this here and I'm running this query, instead of doing all this, why wouldn't I just return shows and then be all good to go? Because then if I return shows on my HTML, I can just go and say something like this, like show.description or show. First name or last name, because I have access to that with that join. Well, what happens is that would work, right? In theory, if I just wanted to show information, that would accomplish what I just said, right? If I were to do something like this, let's just pretend that I didn't do this and I just said show the shows and I return this value, if I were to print shows, what this does is probably going to break my code, but here we are. Yep. But if I were to do this and look at my actual code here, oh, it broke before I can. Oh. Let me see.
I think we also need to pass the data here in the line 46, Will, CLS, comma, data.
No, I'm just doing a select. Cool. So I'm not passing in any data. It's probably something. Oh, it's not liking this.
Oh yeah, you can't, you have to do special ginger comments to comment stuff out.
Yeah, that's what it wasn't liking. Okay. So this is working, right? So it works the exact same. And if I look at this, I have all this data. And in theory, if I wanted to, because I'm iterating through, if I wanted to get the first and the last name, well, I could do something like this, right? I have it, this ID of 1. Let me pull this open, right? This ID of 1, this whole thing is one dictionary. To where I've got an ID, a title, a release date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that makes sense. And if I were to say first name, you can see first name is a key, right, in this dictionary. So if I were on this side to say something like this, where I said, let's just say TD. I'm just going to do this. First name. This should show that information. So it does. Okay. Great. So I see that I can use a dictionary and I can just call that information. Okay, that works. And so it was brought up to my attention, or is brought to my attention of, well, then why am I going to do all of this junk? All I'm wanting to do is show that one name, right? I just want to show the creator. And this is where the difference between a dictionary and an object comes in. So yes, in theory, I could just show that information and that would act kind of the same way. Now, what that does is it works, but it is not scalable. What do I mean by that? Well, if I call that information, right, and I just say I'm going to pass that through, and then I am going to do something like this, where I'm going to say first name, and then I'm going to say show.last name, right? I want the entire creator's name, so maybe I'll just say creator here. If I say this, well, okay, this is going to work just fine. But what if I decide, okay, for security purposes, now anywhere there's a name, there's a full name. I don't want the full last name. I just want the zero, right? I just want the first letter. I just want the zero position of the string. Well, in my entire application, I have to go everywhere that value is, and I have to put in the zero, right? To show, okay, I just want the first part of the last name. And this was not so bad, right? In this application, that's not so bad. But let's say I'm like a Facebook, right? And first name is attached to so many different things. If I'm just doing this dictionary readout, basically, which is what I'm doing, right? I'm just reading this dictionary. That's it. It's static. I can't do anything with it. I can't do any of the functionality of my user. I can't do anything like that. I can simply just read the name. And so anywhere there is a first name, I have to go in and I have to change that in every single space across my entire application. Okay, so whatever makes sense. So why would we do it the other way? Well, if I do it this way and I create this results and I create this object of one show, right? And I create this user object attached to my one show. Now I have access to wherever I am calling that creator. I have access to all the functionality and methods of this entire class. So what does that look like? Well, just like I said, if I wanted to show the first name, right? And I wanted to show the first name a bunch of different places. Well, we talk about having dry code where I don't want to repeat myself, right? I don't want to keep calling the same thing in a bunch of different places. So it's easier to just kind of create a function. So as I'm doing this, we've walked through it to where I am creating or I'm adding a creator object to my actual show object. What I can do, instead of having to call all kinds of information like first name, last name, zero, this allows me to use any methods associated with that class. So here I've got this def full name. Now it's not a class method. It's not a static method. It's just a normal method, right? That is attached to my class. And all this method does is it returns f string, first name, space, last name. That's it. That's all it does. Well, if that's the case, instead of me having to call instead of me having to do this throughout my entire application, what I can do is something like this. I can say show dot creator. Remember, that's my doorway dot. And when I use this dot, not only do I have access to these attributes right here, but I have access to all of these methods. So what I can say is full name. Perfect. And because I'm calling a method, I do have to have the parentheses here. And when I do this, I can come, if I refresh, it still shows Chuck C. What did I change? Show that created a full name. Perfect. So what happens when you mess with your code? Turn results for show and show. Oh, I didn't save this. Whoops. Sorry, I forgot to save it. So now when I call, if I want the creator name, I can just actually call that method. I can just say show.creator.full name. And you might say, okay, that makes sense. I was able to achieve that in another way, but okay, thanks for showing me another way to do that. But where the real power of object-oriented programming comes in is here, this object, or me using this class in this class method, by me doing this throughout my application, instead of me having to go every single place that that first name is called and changing that, let's say I wanted to show just for privacy reasons, I just wanted to show the first letter of the last name. Instead of having to go throughout my application, which could be hundreds of pages, and finding where that is and changing it, I could actually just go to this method right here and say 0. And now anywhere that calls this method, that will be changed. And so from a scalable perspective, if I were to save this and refresh, now you see it changed to all that. I can reuse that same method. If I were to click on the page of my show and I wanted to have a creator on that one, I could use that method. If I wanted to say a review and it showed the creator, I could use that as well. And so you can see is even just in our little application, instead of me having to go and change it in 3 different places, because I make it an object, I can just change it in this method right here and it applies throughout my entire application. So that is why we want to make these an object. Again, you can get away with, if you're just wanting to show this information, you can get away with doing a dictionary. Now in the industry, you will want to make these an object. People don't really necessarily care. Can you just pull something from a dictionary? That should be an expectation. If you have an understanding of the object-oriented programming and the paradigm of creating objects, calling objects, creating a class object of your instance, that is what is going to help you understand coding and help you understand your company's code more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only thing I would have here, well, I mean, the code from 50 up to line 62 on, yeah, here. The results we are getting in the empty list, even if you type like in row 63 results of 0, index 0, we are getting the same thing.
You're getting the first no.
Cool.
If you're trying to get them all, if you do results of 0, that is the first position of the results.
Yeah, the first position of the results. And because this class method is get all shows with users.
I want all my shows and all the users associated. If I wanted to do one show, yeah, absolutely. We'd do maybe the list and, one show where.
No, I forgot to say it like this. In the row 63, the results is coming is a list of dictionary, right?
No, it's a list of objects. That's the difference. This results, because we're appending one show and we're creating a class object here, it is a list of objects. It is not a list of dictionaries. Now they both have the curly brackets.
Yes.
But it is a massive distinction because an object now allows you to run this method. It now allows you to do class methods.
Yeah,
a dictionary does not.
Confusing because we are looking to the list of dictionary and list of objects in the same type of syntax, right? It's a little confusing, right?
So no, I totally understand. They both have the curly bracket. Understanding that we created a class object here is what allows us to use this full name. If I were just to say, I didn't do this whole thing and I just passed in shows, which is my list of dictionaries. If I were to try to pull this full name, I couldn't because it's not associated to a class. It's just like I can just read information. By us making it a object, I can now not only read the information, but I can also run some sort of method if I need. That's the big difference. Because I make this an object here, first off, I make this a class object of show, right? So it runs this init, creates all this information, including this self.creator, and I set it equal to none. Then I reset that creator and I go into my user file right here. And I say for this class user, and when I call this class user, that calls this init function. I give it the data I want to use here. And that is this guy right here. That comes from my dictionary of my first call right here. Then I append the entire object of my show, which is one show, right? I append that to this results. And so now you've got a list of objects, of show objects, Attached to that show object is a user object in this dot creator that is equal to a, user object. So this, whenever I run this right here, this creator goes from none to whatever user that we pass through this object right here. And because of that, although syntactically, yes, and that is very confusing, they do look the same. A dictionary looks the same as an object. They operate very different because now I have access to everything my user has. And maybe that's, full name is just a very easy kind of thing to show, but there might be other methodology or other things that you might want to do with your user, right? That you can maybe have, if I wanted to have a number of books, right? Maybe I've got a method that just has my user's amount of shows or user's amount of something. Well, I could have a method that generates that number. And so all I have to do on my dashboard is say show.creator. Get show number parentheses. It runs that and put the value here like it does with my first and last name. If I do just a dictionary, I cannot do anything like that. And if I do a dictionary on every single page, anytime I want to update and just do maybe the last letter compared to the full last name, every single place I do that, I have to go in and I have to change it versus me just having to change it in one place and it applies throughout my entire application. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense. I also had one question. I hope I'm not getting someone else question. They are also there. So, what's the main purpose of having different controllers? Because I understand why we have different models because of their class, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way we have modeled in our database. That's why we have different model files. But what's the main purpose of having different controllers for each class? Because I have run a class method, like a class method of recipes. I have run in the controller of users, and it has worked.
Yeah, it will work.
Yeah, so why we are bothering and confusing ourselves, like, okay, this is users controller, this is recipes controller, why we should not have one general file that we can reach anything, because this is the controller, this is the root, and we can approach any class method we want.
Sure. And again, that would work, right? You could do that. You could have, I mean, in all seriousness, we could have everything in my server PY. And you wouldn't even need to modularize. But the idea is we do want to break things up because our applications are so small compared to something that is enterprise and scaled, right? So my shows just have 1, 2, 3 methods so far, 3 app routes. But let's say each show had 25 routes, right? Or each thing I used had 25 routes. Whether it's users and my shows and my reviews, and maybe there's even more where I had like a network. And so my network was associated with my show. And as I do that, my file will get very, very, very long. And so what we as development, and this is just a general development overall thing. Like if you go to cloud computing, we use something called containers. And the whole idea is you want to break it up into bite-sized pieces. So that way, if I'm changing something in my user, I don't need to scroll through my show. I don't need to scroll through my IDs, my network. I can just go to my users. That's why we do RESTful routing, right? To say, this is how I'm going to do it, right? Or this is what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm going to my user, and then I can do user/register or user/whatever login. And it allows me to know whatever I am doing with this code in this file is associated just to my user. So I'm not going to break anything in my network because I'm not dealing with my network. I'm just dealing with my user. And so, yes, in theory, you could have one controller. Like that would work. That's not a great tool. And that's not a great kind of syntax to use but because as we scale up in the industry, it will be broken out. Right. And that's because let's say that I'm not in charge of dealing with the other thing is like, what if I'm just an authenticator for like my users? All I'm focused on is maintaining users, user methods, user everything. And let's say Mel is all about shows, right? She is on Netflix and she is dealing with shows in our database and upcoming shows and shows that are leaving and shows that are, 30 days out. And I want to show like, she wants to have a method that says, catch this before it leaves in 30 days, right? And it has a list of all the shows that are about to leave because they're expiring, blah, 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 blah. You don't want to deal in the same file, right? You don't want to work in the same file. You want to be able to have your space and make sure that I'm not ruining anything on Mel's side and Mel's not ruining anything on my side. So
And
yes.
How about the routes that we have both of the class or different multiple classes? Then what's the best practice to which controller we should have? Suppose in a route we have class of users and shows. What's the best practice?
Well, it would depend on what your application is trying to do, right?
Okay.
So like, for instance, this application, I wanting all shows. So I'm going to go from, well, this is my dashboard, but I would want to go from, typically I'd want to go from my show side, right? If I wanted to get all my users, well, then I would go from my user side and so on and so forth.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
So it's just
clear.
depending
Thank
on whatever your application is trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
you. Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
Does that help?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording.